Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the HR Sound Off live podcast show. I am so excited to bring this to you today, and I'm actually testing so many different things right now, but I'm excited to actually get this started. So today I'm actually coming live and direct to you on LinkedIn, but I'm also going live on YouTube, which is the norm, and Facebook, which is the norm. But I'm also going live on Podbean, which is where I normally host my live shows which is where I normally host my podcast show. So today I'm manipulating a couple things all at the same time, but I'm really excited to do this and to have this conversation today. You know me, I like to experiment and see how we can spread the word about all of these amazing, beautiful people in the HR space. So I'm checking, am I live on LinkedIn? Yes, I am. Am I live on YouTube? Yes, I am. I can see Facebook. And I can see that we are live on Podbean for the first time. Wow, let's see how this goes. So my guest today, my brave guest here today to help me have this conversation as we talk about HR, organizational development, and how to navigate the HR journey is Shakil Butt. So I'm going to bring him up right now. Hi, Shakil.
Hi, Dee. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. It's so good to see you and nice to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Very excited to be here, especially with you experimenting in this way that you are. So it's nice to be part of that experiment.
Well, thank you for being so brave and joining me for this today. So we're going to kick off the show with you doing the introduction. So just letting everybody know who you are, and tell us a little bit about your HR origin story. Usually for this part, I'll disappear so that you can share and get to know the audience a little better.
So I'd like to say I thought I had a unique story, but obviously now having been in the HR space for 13, 14 years, I realize actually I'm not that unique. I initially came in through the back door, if that makes sense. I started off my career in finance. I spent 20 years in finance, and I fell into HR accidentally when an opportunity arose in my workplace. There was an interim role. It was only meant to be for 3 months. And I thought, you know, when I was asked to take it on, I'd just applied for a finance director role, got beaten to the post by the incumbent, but it brought me to the attention of the organization to put me forward for the HR and organization development director role. Now, at that point in time, very naively and very perhaps foolishly, I thought I understood what HR and OD was. I'd been working in the management space for 20 odd years. There were odd years, so I thought I understood HR, and I suppose I had a understanding of what HR and OD was, but I certainly didn't really understand what I was taking on. And the 3 months became 6, 6 became 9, 9 ended up becoming 18. And at the 18th month point, the organization, if I was to take on the role, I'd have to, one, go back to university and study a qualification, and two, make it very clear that my days of finance were part of my past. Now, that was quite a hard decision to make. Much blood, sweat, and tears I suffered to get to the point of being a qualified accountant. But this was something that was so new. And if I'm being honest, I'd stagnated. I realized I've been in the role for a good while. I started, repeating some of the things I'd already done, changing the auditors, new finance system, policies, processes, new teams, and it wasn't really that challenging or that stretching. And I probably would have carried on if this interim opportunity hadn't come along. So I'm glad it did. It was something completely new. I was completely in my, out of my comfort zone. I reached out to a number of HR directors who had been, more experienced in this space, and I just asked for help. And one of the things I always encourage everyone to is to be vulnerable and ask. And I was really taken back by how supportive the HR community as a whole is. And I suppose, and I was HRD for 8 years, and I'll talk about that perhaps throughout today's podcast. Then my journey changed because in 2017, I was made redundant. Now, it was a bit of a low point. I won't pretend, being made redundant is never nice for anyone. The word itself is quite negative, isn't it? Redundant, no longer necessary. And I really genuinely believed walk into my next HRD role with my qualifications, my experience, and some of the achievements that I'd achieved up to that point. And that's when I realized actually it's not that straightforward. There is a bit of there's certainly a ceiling whereby people like me, and I'll come back to that later, perhaps don't do as well. And I tried, going down a level, dropping to head of HR roles, and I was told I was too qualified, but I just wasn't making that final grade. Now, at that point, just to finish off my HR origin story, I thought, I'd be chasing a role forever. And I started toying with the idea of being a freelancer. Best decision I ever made. So I know there's been a lot of shift and change of many people joining the gig economy, but for me, the freelance space was certainly a lot more rewarding. Certainly, I felt a lot more control and autonomy over, and I've enjoyed, I'd say, most of that journey. And I'll probably stop there, and I'll share more about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story. There was a lot to unpack there, wasn't there, Shakil? I think that, as we develop our HR journeys, it's so important to share them so that other people understand, that getting into this space comes with its challenges, but it's also very rewarding. And so I'm really glad that you were able to kind of just articulate your journey and share that. I see that Fort Lauderdale is in the house, as well as the Bahamas joining us today. I think the Netherlands is here as well. So welcome to the show, everyone. Please, if you have any questions for us on organizational development, navigating your HR journey, we'll be more than happy to answer those questions throughout the show.
I'll take all the easy ones. You can do all the tough ones.
So let's get into our first question in terms of organizational development in the HR space, because I know for the last 2+ years, we've gone through quite a lot with this pandemic, but also social, political injustices, economic downfalls. It's been a rough time for us in this space. What does the future look like for you in your mind for HR and organizational development?
So unfortunately, I don't have the benefit of my crystal ball, but I'll give it my best shot. So I think before we can think about the future, I think it's important to understand where we came from. And I know when I came into this space, I was quite taken back by some of the language, we use as HR professionals, human resources, human capital, focusing on efficiencies and restructuring and making savings. And I thought, that's really the language I was used to as part of my finance background. Human capital, financial capital, human resources, financial resources, savings and efficiencies and, cost cutting. That was really the language I was used to as an accountant, because as an accountant, it is about, that bottom line figure. It is about, return on investment. It's all about generating more revenue and reducing your costs. And when I came to space, it was interesting to see how many of my HR community were, echoing the same language that I was used to. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, because
a good thing.
if you think back to how the HR profession started, that's not how we started.
No.
In the UK, the CIPD started off as the People and Welfare Association, I think in 1915, before my time, I should add. But it was about people and their welfare. And somewhere along the line, I suppose for validation, we thought we had to echo the language to be heard in the boardroom. I get it. I understand why. We had to echo the language that, that business, want to focus. And it's interesting that when we talk about the future, because I think we were already on a journey and we were seeing a shift and the shift really was around a focus on well-being and mental health and making work more meaningful for people and not being a modern day for want of a better word, turning us into modern day slaves. We're not resources, we're people.
That's it.
And I think that shift, for some that's just been a shift in semantic, and I've seen that. They talk about they've shifted from human resources and organization development to people and culture. But if you understand that it's not just words, and actually those words matter, then isn't that exactly what we're meant to be about as HR professionals? To help people be the best versions of themselves, going all the way back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Isn't that what we're ultimately about? If we can enable people to be the best versions of themselves, then of course they're going to be more focused on contributing more to their organizations, because they'll understand the purpose behind that organization. So it's about thinking about purpose. It's about really understanding what are the values of the organization. And when we talk about culture, it is about creating a climate where people thrive, not survive. And there is a difference. And I think for too many people, this pandemic has been a wake-up call to understand, to think back to, one, how they were treated by their organizations at the height of the pandemic. And we saw, as an accountant, both as an accountant and as a HR professional, when I saw the initial knee-jerk response by organizations, which was laying off people left, right, and center, and in a bid to survive, what they saw was the unknown. It sent a very clear message about who they really value. They don't, all this rhetoric around we value our people. No, you don't. And a lot of these organizations, there were some organizations, I get it. They were in survival mode, and they had to make hard decisions. Some of these organizations, they've been making super profits for a very long time. And the first sign of trouble, offloading their people and doing it in a very,
inhumane way.
Unnecessary, very unkind, and certainly not what we as HR professionals. And, some HR professionals were part and parcel of that. Sadly, that story and that narrative. And I, one of the things I really came to focus on is that if you really want to add value to your senior leadership team, and if they're only looking at the numbers, then they're going to make bad decisions, because they're only looking at the short term. Because that's what, as accountants, I was trained to do. What's the profits for this year? What's the cost savings we can make this year? Not strategically. That's not really strategic long-term thinking. No. And not really thinking about how and you could see the split between organizations that were trying to redeploy their staff, trying to find ways to retain them and keep them employed, or even if it was cutting back hours, reducing hours, but not letting go, and trying to assist their people. So there was a real telltale moment in time. And I think the future, coming back to the question, it's a very exciting place to be right now, because there has been a real the businesses have been looking at their HR and OD professionals to see what they can do to help get through this space. And it's a great place to be right now. We owe it to ourselves to be brilliant. We do.
Oh yes, I love that. We owe it to ourselves to be brilliant. Like, that is such an important thing to recognize, that this really is there's a talk that I give which is called "It's the Most Wonderful Time to Be in HR," and I know a lot of times when I start the talk, people go, "Is she for real? What kind of title is that?" But it really is an exciting time and a wonderful time to be in this space of redefining HR, redeveloping HR, reframing the work, but then also who we are as people in the space, and understanding the importance that we play in creating great organizations. It's more than sitting behind our desk every day, manipulating papers and automated processes. It's about the people, getting into the nitty gritty
I
and
think if
getting
you're
to know your people.
I think if you're still working on policies and processes and systems, then you've missed your calling. You really have. All of those things will be, done by automation. It's a question of
Yes.
time. Again, the recruitment space for those, and again, it's not to say that we're there yet, but the way AI is, moving forward, recruitment is going to change very rapidly and very quickly, with organizations like IKEA, Pepsi, L'Oreal using AI to conduct 300 interviews an hour, using just AI, and that's going to get only more and more sophisticated and more affordable. So doing and again the pricing point of different products and software packages is coming down.
Yes.
So more and more organizations are going to be automating what they can. So where you add value isn't actually around transactional stuff. It really isn't. It is around that bigger picture.
Yeah.
What kind of environment are you going to create for your people where they are valued?
Yeah. I think that it's also important to recognize that a lot of HR people are still not that evolved yet. There are still a lot of us who are still behind the bus in terms of the technology processes and automation and that kind of thing. From a global context, I think there are a lot of people who are still departments of one, running on Google Sheets or running on Excel. However, I do think that the more we expose people to the free technology that's out there, because gone are the days when you could say, my organization does not finance or does not support me purchasing an HRIS system. Well, there are HRIS systems that exist for free, right? Zoho, People, Bamboo HR, Orange, HRM, all of these companies have some form of their technology available that you can use free of cost for a period of time, or until you develop and grow. So I think that we have to get in a space, and that's why I say it's exciting. And I think that's why you would agree that, there are so many things that we can do to improve our lot in this profession. We just have to learn how and get the exposure that we need. Gone are the days when we said we couldn't afford to go to an HR conference, because now, even if you can't physically pay to go to one, they're offering some form of it in a free format that you can benefit from. You have HR Summer School on LinkedIn, which is free, Hacking HR, which is free. So you have all of these different things now that are helping us as HR to say, okay, come on, guys, no longer can you have these excuses. You've got to get on the bus and move things forward.
But I suppose it comes back to your HR for HR. We need to look after ourselves. Nobody else will. Unless we get into the driving seat of our own careers, we're going to end up, looking after everybody else, making sure they develop, making sure they thrive and grow, and not, be looking after ourselves. And that's not going to take us forward, only backwards.
No, definitely not. But I also love the point that you made about we can't be process driven. If we're still process driven, we're going to get lost in the wash as HR continues to evolve and grow. And that we should be in a space where not only do we recognize the importance of helping our people to thrive, but also helping ourselves to thrive. Because an HR professional who is full of knowledge to share and give is a healthy HR professional, but also a professional who is going to continue to progress in their career. So we can't stay behind. We have to move things forward. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to get a little clarification for some of the audience in terms of, because I know a lot of times HR professionals are generalists, but you specifically made a decision to focus on organizational development. What does that mean exactly? What has your
So
career
that's a
in
good
OD
question.
looked like?
So what I've found, Julie, is that when you speak to any HR and OD professional, their understanding of OD varies from person to person, and that's because most organizations, they don't know, when they have a part of the organization they don't actually know what to do with, it gets handed over to HR and OD because it's to do with people, it's to do with the organization, which pretty much covers everything. So you will find practitioners out there, given communications, they're given logistics, they're given administration, transportation, IT, and I think that's a distraction. If you're not, if your focus is not on the strategy of the organization, on the values of the organization, of the culture of the organization, on understanding what the purpose of the organization is, and then being able to convey that to the people to get that engagement, then you're not going to help your organization succeed, because people are looking for purpose. People are looking for something that they feel they can contribute and be engaged with. So it's not as simple as a staff survey. It is about what you're doing with that staff. So it's not as simple as doing post-point surveys or articulating the values. It's about how you embed those values and how you measure those values. So it's so much more. And I think people undersell because it's easy to do the transactional stuff in HR, and then the organization development part looks like, and it's easier to cut and paste what they've seen in other organizations. So our organizational design will be based on a similar organization. Why does it have to be based on a similar organization? Why not start with a blank piece of paper and try to find out what is going to work best for you in your context with the resources you have, and be actively involved in guiding the senior leadership team. That's what an exciting place to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think a lot of times, to your point about comparison and cutting and pasting, a lot of times as organizations, we kind of look to the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons to see what they're doing and see if we can put that in our context of our organization. But if you notice the news and you read, the reports that come out about these companies, even when it comes to simple things like paying their employees, there was a whole big thing about that with Amazon just the other day. When you think about their DEI strategies and how they are looking at women in leadership, people of diverse backgrounds in their leadership spaces, their numbers are, a lot of them, their numbers are low. So even though they put them out there for transparency's sake, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, right?
It's a lot of marketing and spin, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Exactly.
But if you're not, I mean, I always say, especially when you're talking about D&I or any initiative, it does come down to the appetite of the organization, because it doesn't matter how good you are as a practitioner. You could be brilliant, you could be amazing, but if you haven't got, the organization doesn't have the appetite, then there's a stringing you along with with nice words, if I'm being honest. And if that's the case, as soon as you realize that, get out and go somewhere where you can add value and shape the organization and shake the organization.
Which brings me to my next question. What advice do you have for HR professionals that want to specialize in OD or any other area? And I think that that's so important, what you just said about, if you realize that the organization is stringing you along, then you need to think about, is this the place that you really want to be? A lot of times HR professionals stay because they think, I really want to make an impact. And if they haven't made an impact, instead of thinking, you know what, it's not me, it's the fact that the organization doesn't have the appetite for what I'm bringing to the table, and maybe I need to move on to a table that will take on what I have to bring and will have the appetite for it, versus, oh my God, I failed. I'm doomed.
Well, that's a great point, Julie. I mean, this question about, like, I get people asking me in our community, I want to move into this area, I want to move into that area. And when I dig a bit deeper, I realize that they've been in that space for maybe a few years as a generalist, and they want to now specialize. And I think as a generalist, it is perhaps the best place to start and to expose yourself to as many different areas of HR as possible, whether it's policies, processes, creating the values, doing staff surveys and looking at and drilling down into the results, doing facilitating, leadership development, whatever that part of your role is, but to expose yourself as much as possible, because again, what you might think looks great and to use the word sexy, because it's the in thing right now, it might not necessarily be where you're naturally, you have a natural affinity to.
Yes.
And one of the great things about coming out of the other end of the 8 years as a HRD was, coming back to that freelance question, was actually I recognized there was things I could do, but I didn't enjoy them. I wrote policies, I reviewed policies, didn't enjoy doing that. So it is about partially finding what you enjoy, and what will challenge you. And you've actually exposed yourself to as much of the different areas that we do now, and we have very broad shoulders and we wear very many hats. So expose yourself as much as possible. Find yourself a mentor or mentors who you can talk to and bounce off ideas with, because that will help you shape your thinking about what you really want to specialize in. Because you might be disappointed if you go down, if you switch too soon. There might be a better area for you to experience and develop yourself in.
Yeah.
So give yourself time. There's no rush. It is the journey, as they say. There's no rush. Take your time and really relish that time that you've got to do different things.
Yeah.
Because once you specialize, that's all you'll get.
Yeah, that's it. I totally agree. Like, I feel just as we have, different industries, like, for example, doctors in the medical field, doctors start out as generalists. So they touch everything from neurology to oncology to, dealing with babies. So they touch everything. And then they make a decision on, do they want to stay as a GP or do they want to actually specialize and become something else? So having that firsthand of everything that they've touched then helps them to be great GPs or to be great specialists. And I think the same is true for us in the HR space. Try to learn as much as you can. I totally agree. Being a generalist is great, but is it what you want to do forever?
Yeah.
Time will tell, but then when you do decide to specialize, be very intentional about it. And I love the point that you made about mentor/mentors, because sometimes I think that people think they should only have one mentor. But
no, definitely not.
I had a mentor for some of everything. Like, all throughout my career, I've had mentors, not a mentor. And each person specializes in something differently. Whether I've had a mentor for recruitment, I've had a mentor for culture, I've had a mentor for DEI. So, like, having those people in your corner, in your space, helping you along your journey helps you to sharpen, because they are specialists. So that helps to sharpen you and who you are as a generalist.
It keeps them sharp as well, Julie, because when you ask them questions they can't answer, then it puts them on that spotlight as well. So it keeps everybody sharp.
Well, let me ask you this, just on the side, when it comes to mentorship, what is your preference? Because I know there are organizations that specialize in providing mentors. I've always been a huge fan of organic mentorships, like developing relationships and then people gradually becoming my mentor. What's your take on that?
I suppose both. I suppose it comes down to what works for the individual. So I know some people like it very structured. I'm probably similar to yourself, Judy. I like to quite organic. I don't go out saying I'm looking for a mentor. I'll just meet somebody for coffee and literally squeeze as much out of them as I can possibly can. In that this pre-pandemic, I was meeting people from across the profession at all different stages of their career paths. So senior leaders to people who are students just starting their HR journey, and just giving an hour of my time, getting an hour of their time. And I always find that valuable because it always gave me, things to think about and insights to chew over. But likewise,
Yeah.
I'm hoping I gave the other person something to think about and chew over as well. So for me, I think it's, I've preferred the organic. But I do know, for example, the CIPD do have a mentoring program
Mentoring.
where they will
Yes.
match senior leaders with people at the starting point of their careers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it takes that having that structure, having makes it a little bit more rigid, and so I suppose it's horses for courses, really. There's no
Yeah.
right or wrong way to do it.
Exactly. Just your preference. I wanted to check in on
Treating
the
people like
comments.
people.
Exactly. I wanted to check in on the comments, and I see Julianne is saying she needs to work on automation. To her point about automation, like what are some of the things that you think are important to be automated in an HR role almost immediately, whether you're starting or developing your career? What's important to automate?
I suppose it depends on the organization and what processes you're following currently. So the starting point would be really to find out what are your processes that you're following and do they actually make sense. So before jumping to automation, do your
Yeah.
processes that you have, whether it's around recruitment, attraction, retention, whatever process you're following, do they actually make sense? Because quite often what happens in organizations is a process is in place, it stays in place, and the organization grows, it moves on, but the process stays as it is,
Yeah.
and it's no longer fit for purpose. And then when the opportunity comes to automate that process, it's just automated wholesale rather than asking the bigger question, which is, do we need this process?
Yeah.
And is there a different way of doing this? And whenever you get, I mean, I know you've had Perry Timms on here, so I won't steal his
Yeah.
thunder. But he talks about agile design thinking, which
Yep.
I think is brilliant, which is around bringing people together to solve
Yep.
a problem. And it's not the practitioners, the HR specialists are the ones to solve the problem. They might contribute to solving the problem, but actually getting people across the organization involved. And it might be around, timekeeping. It might be sickness absence, whatever the issue is, car parking space, could be anything. But whatever the issue is, getting people around the table and actually getting people to be in a very fluid, agile way to think about the problem and come up with a solution together
Yeah.
and then design as a process, I think would be the starting point. And then thinking about how you automate it.
Mm-hmm.
So the step before automation, I would advocate that needs to happen. The problem with most HRIS systems is that they have so many modules and they have so
Mm-hmm.
many bells and whistles and everything looks shiny and great.
Yes.
But it's what are you your organization right now? What's taking up the time? Is it that you're spending too much time recruiting and your managers are engaging in recruitment? And if
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, why is that? Because you've got an attrition problem. If that's happening, what's causing the attrition? So it's about digging, keep running the question back until you actually find what is the organizational pain that you're trying to address or the
Yeah.
opportunity that you're trying to take advantage of. So
Mm-hmm.
it's about just taking a step back rather than diving in, I would say.
Yes. Yeah. I got to agree with you. I am all for agile principles and methodologies being adopted in the HR space. And I'm a huge fan of Perry's work as well as Natal Dank in terms of creating that agile organizational transformation. And I think it's really important, especially when you're a department of one, uh, creating that
Yeah.
agile mindset in your organization is important because then you get everyone across the organization to chip in and help
Mm.
you to come up with those solutions. I was interviewing someone yesterday, and they were saying, HR needs to stop being the prescription office. You go to the doctor, it gives you a prescription. We need to stop doing that, but we need to come together collectively and work together to create solutions. And help
Yeah.
people to use their brain to think, right? Versus us as HR coming up with the answer all the time. So I totally agree with you there. We're
Yeah.
gonna switch
If you're familiar
vehicles.
with
Just
nudge, sorry, I was
go
just going to
ahead.
say,
Go
if you're
ahead.
familiar with nudge theory, if you're familiar with
Yes.
nudge theory, which I think is brilliant, that's our role. It should be to nudge the
Nudge.
organization along, not necessarily, handhold and carry,
Exactly.
because we have much more to do than just handhold and carry.
way more, way more. And you find that your load gets a lot lighter when you take on that mindset as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to switch vehicles just a little bit and talk
Yeah,
about
sure.
moving from OD to DEI and your journey in the DEI space. What made you decide to shift and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So it wasn't by design. Again, I'll have this. It was by accident. Um,
Okay.
I was very fortunate that I get to speak at a number of conferences and events, and I get invited to, speak in the UK and internationally, which is fantastic. But
Mm-hmm.
what was quite noticeable was, I suppose, what really hit home to me was when I was speaking at the HR Directors Conference, and I spoke at the HR Directors Conference in the Netherlands, and I spoke at it at the one in Dubai. Was all these senior HR leaders, CHROs, HRDs.
Yeah.
They were all, to be very frank, there seemed to be a real problem with diversity within our profession. Pretty
Mm-hmm.
much everyone across I know, obviously, up to a certain level, it's very female dominated. Beyond that level, at the most senior levels, it's male dominated, which doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So many women in the profession, but all the senior roles are mostly occupied, or
By men.
disproportionately
Yeah.
occupied by men,
Mm-hmm.
mostly white. Um, and I was one of the very few, persons of a ethnic background at these events. And I'd look out into the audience, and I'd notice that every single time. And then I'd attend the student conferences, and I'd look at the student conferences, and I could see actually it's not a problem with the pipeline. There's plenty of people from diverse backgrounds coming into the profession. They're just not
Mm-hmm.
making it to the senior roles, and for whatever reason, um, we failed as a profession. We are the ones tasked with tackling DEI, and
Yeah.
yet we haven't solved our own problem.
Mm-hmm.
We have had and I've had very long conversations with senior HR leaders, including with CIPD as a board member, that actually we've even if you look at some of the language we use, it's always if anything, if the only two areas of strand that we were tackling up until recently really gender and
Yeah.
LGBT, and
Mm-hmm.
that'd be pretty much it, and it would
Yeah.
ignore pretty much every other type of difference. So it wasn't something that I didn't want to be the person of ethnic background, championing inclusion from a race perspective,
Right.
but I ended up having to that space because I could see very few people in that space. But it was much more than just race. One of the things that
Yeah.
I had an advantage of, when I see it as an advantage, was I went to a special needs school as a child. So for me, my upbringing was actually being surrounded by children who were different to perhaps what most people would have had at school. So
Yeah.
in the 1970s in the UK, there was no inclusion policy. If you
Nope.
were different, you were sent to a special needs school. So my difference was that severely asthmatic. But
Okay.
in my school, that meant I had children who had physical challenges like myself. So
Mm-hmm.
one of my colleagues, fellow pupils, had a hole in his heart. Another other students, pupils, had physical deformities. So there was a girl who had quite a large growth on the side of her face. Another girl had her feet facing out. One girl was blind in one eye, wore an eye patch. We had children with learning difficulties and disabilities. So I was very exposed to difference from a very early age. And when I came into I suppose, what you'd classify as mainstream schooling or normal schooling, and I use normal with inverted commas, I
Commas.
realized actually the
Mm-hmm.
world isn't kind. It can be quite cruel if
Yeah.
you're seen as different. So being in that HR space where I know we are meant to be championing inclusion, where we're meant to be making sure the workplace is welcoming for everyone, and realizing that we were falling short, I suppose put me down a path where I started talking more and more about D&I. I started writing more articles about it. I started, then delivering training on it. And I'm
Yes.
now, and then with an organization as a D&I consultant, working with them. So it's been great to be able to take that on.
Yeah.
But I think as a whole professional community, and I'm looking at all of us, there's so much more that we should be doing and can be doing. But it does come back down to
Absolutely.
the appetite of the organization. Are they paying lip service, or are they serious about actually trying to make a difference?
Difference. You are so right. And especially when it comes to race and gender, like I think a lot of times people see DEI only in that lens of race and gender, but there's
Yeah.
so much more to DEI than race and gender. And to your point, like one of my focuses when I talk about DEI is from the lens of being neurodiverse because I have ADHD. And so it's something
Right.
for me that where my attention deficit shows up doesn't mean I can't perform. But these are the things that are going to show up when I'm working with you as someone with ADHD. And I
Yeah.
think it's really important for people to recognize that a neurodiversity is not a disability. It can be your superpower, and how you use that
Yeah.
in a way effectively can change the way you work. I mean, when you think about persons with autism, their ability to find the details, the most delicate of
The
errors,
patterns. Yeah.
is mind blowing. So that you now have organizations like the Pentagon and NASA working with people who are autistic because they're looking for those details. So I think it's really important for us to think about DEI with a bigger lens as HR people.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that enough. And also, like I recently spoke at the Amplify DEI Summit, which is done by Vivian Aqua in the Netherlands. Kudos to her. And one of the conversations they were having was around understanding how architecture plays a part in diversity. Your building architecture, and is it created in such
Yeah.
a way that it helps the colors in your building matter and how that helps with people's moods? And also, if your building has ramps, the chairs that you have in your building, are they seated for people who are of bigger frames? How inclusive are you really being when you think about those things? So I
Yeah.
totally appreciate the work that you are doing around DEI and helping people to understand the difference. But I got to ask you, what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way in navigating your journey in DEI?
I suppose the hardest lesson that I've learned was that, and I use this often in my training, as a picture of Bruce Willis from Die Hard, because I like the fact that DIE, diversity, inclusion, and equity, is hard. It's damn hard,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason it's hard is not by accident; it's by design. And all of us will have studied at some point or some kind of management theory around how the world of work was constructed in the 1900s with Taylorism, Henry Fayol, Fordism, etc., etc. But this was a world of work imagined by white men for other white men. It wasn't imagined for a world including women or people
Yeah.
of ethnic backgrounds or people with disabilities or difference. It wasn't. And that's the honest reality of it. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
100-year legacy that you're pushing back against when you're in this space. And we have to, even when I say 100 years, it's not even 100 years. It's women first entered the workforce after World War One, into the farms and the factories, when the men went off to fight. Second World War, the men and the women went off to fight, but women also again entered the farms and the factories. But at the end of both of those wars, they went back into their homes, and it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
until 1947 that women entered the workforce en masse with the creation of the NHS. So it's taken a long time for even women to get into the workforce. 100 years from the world, the modern creation of the world of work as we know it. So we are behind the curve, and there's a lot of catching up to do. So that's one of the hard lessons I realized. And I suppose the other lesson is that actually a lot of organizations talk about it, but they're not really serious. And you can tell they're not serious because they will appoint a D&I lead and think that's it, job done. That's not job done. Or they'll create the platform for having an employee resource group and think job done. And what you're actually doing is asking the people who are suffering from the discrimination they face within your organization to solve the problem that they never created. And you're saying to the employee resource group, now, we've created you, giving some resources and time, fix what's wrong. But, and they can be part of the solution, but they're not the solution. So there's little things like that, quite telltale signs about where your organization is on its journey, and it's going to take time, it's going to take resources, because you're trying to unpack a lot. And it's going to take granular understanding about what actually is the problem.
Yeah, and that all is going to take a lot of time. But I really appreciate the journey and the struggles, but the lessons that you've learned, because it really helps us to understand that we are going to have, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. And the mindset around the space really needs to shift for everyone in order for us to be able to create safe and inclusive spaces. And I like the fact that you said, DEI is hard. And I remember hearing someone say you can't spell hard without using HR. So in general, it is hard work that we do. And there are times when we need support to educate ourselves, to build our communities. And one of the spaces that I am always grateful for is the CIPD space. And I know that you are sitting as a director on the board of the CIPD. For those in our audience who are not aware of what the CIPD is, what it does, can you give us a little explanation? I know I always say to people, it's the European version of what we have in North America as SHRM. So in America, you have SHRM. In the UK, Europe, you have CIPD. But tell us about the benefits of being a part of the CIPD.
It's a chartered organization with a royal charter. It's a charitable organization, and its charitable purpose is about championing better work and better working lives. So that's quite a broad mandate. We have about 160,000 members across the world. Most of those are in the UK, so about 140,000 of those are in the UK. The remainder are in Asia, the Middle East, and the rest of the world. We're still, I suppose, I've been on the board now since 2016. This is my last year, and it's been exhausting because it is. We have a 6-year term, and it's exhausting because we're trying to do so much and support our community. And there's a lot of support that the CIPD offers in terms of development, career journey. Advocating and championing better work, being a voice for the profession, challenging government on different issues, whether it's around working flexibly from day one, the ethnicity pay gap, raising the awareness around menopause and the changes that take place, which is often not talked about. So it's got a massive. It does so many different things, but it really is there to raise the bar, because again, as I'm sure you know, Julie, to be an accountant, really, you're not going to be recognized unless you've got a qualification. To be an HR practitioner or OD practitioner, you don't necessarily need to have a qualification.
Correct.
What it brings to you is that almost limitless resources that the organization has to the forefront to support you in your journey and your learning. If there's a piece of work that you're doing for the first time, there'll be a toolkit that you'll be able to get from the CIPD. If there's facts and figures that you need to make a business case argument, you'll be able to go back to the CIPD to get those facts and figures. If there's things that are happening right now, whether it's around the response to Ukraine or the response to the pandemic or the response to Black Lives Matter, the CIPD has always been there to make sure that we have resources to help support you in making sure that you're effective in your role. And I suppose that's the biggest value of a membership organization like CIPD and like SHRM, because you can't, if you only repeat what you know, then you're only repeating exactly that what you know. Whereas if you reach out and connect and actually take advantage of all the resources that are around you, now suddenly you have a superpower. It's you and the professional community that creating your standpoint.
Yes. I've learned so much through my CIPD journey. I love attending the conferences, although, like I will say, it's one of the conversations that I sparked recently on Twitter, and it caused quite a buzz. Is I still feel like, in terms of the speaker lineups, there's still that lack of diversity that I think we really need to see an improvement in that
changed,
space.
Julie. It has changed. You're very right. When I first came to the space, I pulled up the organizers of our events to say good enough, and I was quite taken back. Thankfully, that individual is no longer with the organization, moved on to a different organization. But the response I got was, looking at the lineup, we don't have diversity. And the response I got back was, well, this is not a diversity conference. And I said, well, you're missing the point. Then, if I'm attending, if I want to attract the wider community, which is diverse, then you need to have diverse speakers on every topic, and not just talking about diversity and inclusion. I want to see a diverse looking speaker speaking on engagement or employment law or any other topic, culture or values or whatever's current. So it's come a long way. And again, if you look at the lineups that we have now, they are very diverse. If you look at the magazine, it's full of diverse images. So it's moving in the right direction. But I want to make sure it's not just a surface level move, and it actually is genuinely trying to represent and role model what we should all be doing.
Exactly.
That's a good call out.
And I think it's important to recognize that there is improvement. I mean, as I said to you earlier, before we came on air, like, I'm originally from Manchester, and I've always wanted to support CIPD Manchester more. And I'm about to be a part of a panel discussion on the same topic of DEI for CIPD Manchester. And I've just realized that Peter Cheese is actually going to be on the panel. And I was like, great time for me to call him out on some stuff.
Do that. I call him out all the time, so we need to. And that's the beauty of being an open organization, where actually you can call out what you see and ask for more and ask for better, because we deserve it.
Exactly. We definitely do. I can see our time is getting close to the end. So let me just ask you these last couple questions. What advice would you give to your younger self about navigating the HR field?
I suppose the biggest mistake I made, and I touched on it at the very beginning, was that I think once you start repeating your greatest hits, you're in that space too long. You're not growing anymore. Even as HRD, I was in that role for 8 years, and I was, it was my, my third or fourth, staff survey, my, second strategy that was rolling out, second attempt at redefining the values, the culture, rewriting the policies for HR and building a new team. And I think if you're in an organization where you're repeating your greatest hits, it's time to move on. It's time to get yourself out of comfort zone and embrace the fear, because it's easy staying where you are. It is, but you're not going to grow. And trying to find out, can you repeat your success somewhere else? And if you can't, that's okay. It's okay to fail. Don't be afraid of failure. We all, Nelson Mandela said it beautifully. Either I win or I learn. I never lose. And I think if we embrace that mindset, then we will carry on growing. And then we become that which we, push out to the rest of the organized growth mindset. Keep growing, and keep learning.
Great advice. And I hope
that's what I would do.
Awesome. And I hope that everyone takes that advice to heart. Thank you so much for sharing it. Now, I wouldn't be HR for HR if I didn't ask you, how do you practice self-care?
So you're almost looking at it. So I do a number of things. So the artwork you can see around me is what I did over the Christmas break, because I got burnt out and I needed to switch off, and I'll just angle my camera so you can see. That's one wall. That's the other wall.
Wow.
And I make a point of trying to switch off completely. And being in the freelance space is sometimes difficult to do that. but I do turn work down when I can see that I've got back-to-back work with clients. I'll actually
Yes.
start turning work down, and that sounds a bit, like I'm shooting myself in the foot. But if we really believe what we say as a professional community, that it's about our own well-being, then
Yes.
chasing opportunities constantly means that you actually start harming yourself. So I make a point of actually turning down work when I think I need to, switching off completely. I like to make sure that I spend time with family. I
Yeah.
get to the gym every single day, doing something different every single day, whether it's swimming, running, weights, whatever it is. But I make sure I spend that time looking after myself,
Mm-hmm.
and reconnecting with what's important. One of my oldest friends and dearest friends said to me, "You know what? I'm not." When I asked him if he was successful, he said, "You know what? I'm not cash rich, but I am time rich." And that's all we have, Julie, is time.
Time.
And I think sometimes we forget that's the only thing is time.
Yeah.
And how we spend it is totally up to us. If you're in a role which is killing you, and I've been there, where I was in a role that was making me work, weekends, evenings, always trying to finish off that piece of work, and then the next piece of work comes straight after. It's a no-win situation, because it's never going to end until you take control of your well-being.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you are taking the right steps to take care of yourself, especially in the space that you're in. And you're a very busy man, and I appreciate you taking the time to, share your experiences and your journey with us today. And thank you for sharing your self-care tips too, because I think we all learn from, everyone's way of practicing self-care in one way or the other. So what's next for Shakil Butt?
So when I said I'm coming off the CIPD board this year, I do plan to take a bit of a break for my next non-exec role. But I do want to be hopefully on another non-executive role, simply because, to be very frank with yourself, with people who are cleverer than you learn so much. I like being the idiot in the room, because that's how you grow. When you're surrounded with people who know as much as you or know less than you, it might feel great. It might make you feel important. But it comes back to that growth. You won't grow.
Mm-hmm.
So being on the board of the CIPD, I was on the board with HR directors of some of the biggest names of organizations, the biggest brands, and just listening to them and absorbing and learning from them, but also challenging them and realizing that they don't have all the answers. And that's a good thing to realize as well. So beyond that, I do have 3 book ideas. I've written over 100 articles. Again, if you go to my LinkedIn page, you'll see them. So if anybody wants to see, I've written on a whole range of topics. So feel free to have a look at those. I've reviewed a number of books. I've judged Business Book of the Year awards. So I think it's time for me to write my own few books now. And I've got one that I started last year drafting out an outline. I got a publisher saying, yeah, we'll be happy to publish that. And then I just haven't had time to actually focus on it. So I need to do that. I think I owe it to myself to get that one book out of me.
You definitely do. You definitely do. And I'll definitely be looking forward to reading that for sure.
Thank you.
Go for it. With that being said, you have survived your time with us today for the HR Sound Off Monthly Live. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for being here and joining us for this conversation. So like I said, this is my monthly live. This is what it looks like. Every month, I'm going to talk to one amazing person and magnify their HR voice. So next month, you have a little bit of a treat. So I'm always talking about HR community and what it means to me. And next month, I am going to introduce you to my HR community. So joining us for next month, we're going to have Eric Kershott from HR Hot Seat. We're going to have Alicia from Collab HR, Jennifer McClure from Disrupt HR, Adesi Okajoy from Black Woman in HR, Enrique Rubio from Hacking HR, and Wendy Daly, who is one of the organizers of the Twitter chat for the HR podcast. So look out for that coming up next.
Sounds very exciting, Julie.
Yes, I'm very excited for it. So with that being said, everyone, have an awesome afternoon, evening, weekend. Stay safe, Take care of yourself. And remember, we are here for you no matter what. HR for HR is here to stay. And HR Sound Off will sound off again in April. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Take care.